From the Blind Ability Studios, it's Wellness Wednesday with your host, Beth Gustin and Robin Ennis.
It's challenging for those of us experiencing grief at this time of year, especially if the grief is acute or you're newly grieving. You're probably going, joyous? Festivities? Expletive? No.
Nobody grieves the same way. And so being gentle with yourself and the people around you in whatever process that they may be going through to help them cope.
New traditions will have to be started, but for now, we're just continuing on.
Welcome back to Wellness Wednesday. This is Beth Gustin, licensed professional counselor in Colorado, here with my co-host Robin Ennis, a licensed clinical social worker in Colorado. And we are honored to have the esteemed Jeff Thompson himself on our podcast today. And we are going to be talking about holidays and grief and gratitude and how we are going to weave all those three things together.
And I know it may sound like a lot, but they really do intersect and intertwine to help us make it through times that can be joyous for people, right? When you think of the holidays, you think of family time, the music, the food. But for some people, it also may be a time of remembrance, right? It can be bittersweet, remembering people who may not be with us, or remembering a relationship that may have ended, or a job that may have ended. And maybe the holidays cause people to have a variety of feelings that they have to cope with.
Absolutely. And I think it's challenging for those of us experiencing grief at this time of year, especially if the grief is acute or you're newly grieving. You're probably going, joyous? Festivities? Expletive? No, I'm not there. Whereas if you're further down your path on your grief journey, you might be able to acknowledge there's some things you're grateful for this holiday season, or there are some good times you had you can look back on that were actually very peaceful or happy and positive. So this really is going to depend on where you are on your grief journey.
I agree. And I want to add that, so as a therapist, there's a few of my clients who are newly entering into the grief journey. And particularly, I hear the common theme is, well, people are saying that I should be grateful for, for having my loved one for as long as I did, or, I shouldn't be showing the crying, or I shouldn't be showing a certain emotion when it comes to grief. And so, it's okay to navigate, grief the way that best helps you in the moment. Some people cry, some people, don't cry. Some people like to talk out their feelings. Some people don't. It's trying to keep moving forward in your grief journey while allowing yourself permission to heal in whatever way that may look like. And that varies from person to person. So I just encourage people to be gentle with themselves if you are not in that place of gratitude with your grief.
I also want to add to that I work with a number of clients, given that I specialize in grief. The majority of my clients come to me at various stages in their grief process, and I give them permission to say no at the holidays. So it's okay to say no and not attend that family gathering. It's okay to go for an hour and leave. It's okay to think you might want to go, and then that morning you wake up and you're like, no, sorry, I'm not going to make it. And that is all okay. That's a normal part of the grief journey. That's a normal part of whatever phase you're at in your grief process.
I agree. And I supervise employees who are trying to get their licensure for social work. And one counselor had mentioned that during the month of November, and I believe I mentioned this last year, but during the month of November, she reminds herself that it's okay to say no, right? So in November, N-O. So it's more easier for her to remember that just because she says no, it doesn't mean that she's being mean, but rather she's taking care of herself. And during grief, it's really important to take care of yourself because it can be exhausting. Jeff, I'm wondering, with blind abilities, have you had any people that you've had to coax through the being able to say no, or about yourself? Is it hard for you to say no?
First of all, it's great to be here with you, coming from the editing room myself. But yeah, throughout the years, 980 some podcast episodes, there's a lot of people, some have passed, some have had loved ones passed. And one of the people who's on the podcast had his wife pass away. And there's a time, I think, respecting someone's space sometime. I mean, in the holidays, a lot of people get together that maybe not been around each other, and everyone's gone through different changes. And like this situation, the term, is it too soon? Or is it, where I think you got to read people, especially when you're there for the holidays, be cognizant that not everybody's there full of joy and cheer and holiday spirits. And some people are there, like Beth mentioned earlier before we started recording, the empty chair, giving people their space to grieve too.
There's one less chair at the table during the holiday seasons, or more than one, and feeling the emptiness can be really hard. One thing I work with my clients on around the holidays especially, but any time of year, is having different versions of the same story that they might want to tell at the holiday gathering to people who are there that may not know that a loved one has died or that don't know what happened. And so what I mean by that is, depending on who you're talking to, depends on which length of story you tell. So you might tell the Cliff Note version because it's the shortest, it's the easiest for you to talk about, and it ends quickly and you don't have to invite questions. Or you might have the abridged version. So a little more detail, but again, it's shorter than the full-length unabridged version. And helping clients figure out what those look like for them can really help them have some ways to have a conversation about their loss and about their grief that feels more comfortable to them and keeps them more in control of that conversation.
Right. I like that, having different versions, or even being okay to say, I can't talk about that right now, or, it's too difficult. I do like that, Beth. And it just, has me thinking about my own grief, right? Because there was times where I would just burst into tears every time I would try to even get a sentence out. So it's reading the room, and like Beth mentioned, knowing which version of the story that you want to tell. I like that.
I want to completely flip the script here for a minute, and I want to talk about the other side of grief. Because for many people experiencing grief, there can be a really uncomfortable emotion called relief that is often experienced when someone dies. And people often feel guilty for experiencing this, and I'm here to tell you there's nothing to feel guilty about, because that relief is very normal and valid. But we don't talk about it much because it's uncomfortable. And we feel like we shouldn't be relieved when someone dies, but there's a lot of reasons why we're relieved. It doesn't take away the sadness and the pain and the missing them and the loss, but it is a commonly experienced emotion.
It is commonly experienced. I agree.
Yeah, it's a quick little story. My mom passed away a little over a year ago. I was there most of the night, came home, and then I also got a call a few hours later and went back up there, and she had passed. And the feeling that came over me was that relief feeling, because I did a lot of grieving as her health was going, and then to see the peace and calm. And I've heard these stories. Yeah, I've read about them. I've saw movies about it. But until you experience it, all of a sudden that calmness came over me. Like, it's okay. And it was quite an experience of a lifetime that I had to go through to understand it.
Yeah, and I think it can catch us off guard if we think too much about it. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we might feel that relief. If you were a caregiver that provided majority of the care, there's going to be relief there because you're exhausted, and rightfully so. If the person was in a lot of pain and the passing wasn't peaceful, yes, you're going to feel relieved, and that's okay. That's normal. If it's, like Jeff explained, where it's just, I felt peaceful, and, there's a lot of reasons why we feel this way. And I don't think we acknowledge it enough. And especially if the person was living with a long terminal illness, we do begin grieving once that diagnosis is received. And we grieve throughout that whole entire journey with them. Doesn't mean we don't grieve after they've died or passed, but we do much of our grieving in many cases before.
I agree. And the key is that you said we grieve along with them. And it really is not an individual experience. It's a family or a system experience with grief. It impacts, the people around them. So if you do have somebody and watching them go through a long lasting terminal illness, when that diagnosis hits, depending on the prognosis, you do grieve what could have been, what the future could have been. It's definitely traumatic in going down that path. Yes, it can be an expected emotion to have relief. And one thing with grief is that, no, again, I cannot say this enough, is that nobody grieves the same way. And so being gentle with yourself and the people around you in whatever process that they may be going through to help them cope. I think that when people say that weddings and funerals bring out the worst in people, I feel that grief in particularly, can isolate some people because they feel like they can't show their true emotions, or they can't show their raw emotions because they'll be judged for the way that they are missing their loved ones.
Yes, and I believe that your grief is as unique as you are. It's like fingerprints. No two sets are the same. And your grief is very similar to that.
Yes.
And I think it depends on what kind of loss you've experienced. A sudden loss is going to have different layers to it than a loss that is quote unquote more expected. And all these different factors, how old was the person? That's going to play a role. There's lots of factors that we think about when we are grieving, and how our grief process is going to look and how we might express our grief. And so I think the bottom line that I tell my clients is, be gentle with yourself and you do what works for you. It's about you right now. It's okay to be about you right now. Your brain is in intensive care and it should be treated as such. No matter how you choose to navigate the holiday season, do what is best for you. Mm-hmm. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. It's okay to go party and live it up and let off some steam. Mm-hmm. You can make that choice.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I'm curious, during your grief process with your mom and you had that sense of relief, do you feel like people were supportive of your feelings? Because you mentioned that it took you a while to come to terms or understand that it was okay to have that feeling. How do you feel like your support system around you helped you come to terms with that?
Yeah. As you were talking there, I was going back in my mind. I remember the moment I walked in and it was quiet and my mom was just laying there. But now that I look back, around me were my sisters who had cared for her a lot. Of course, they drive. They could make it out there a lot more than I could. And my brother and my stepdad was there. And that's where gratitude came in, because we were all sharing. It was all unique because we're all individuals and all that. But we all shared, I believe it was the relief, the calmness that came from it, and, the celebration of life and stuff like that. My situation, yes, it was expected that she was going to pass. But my situation now for Thanksgiving and stuff, it's the same group of people coming together again. And it's unique. Like you said, Robin, what future was ahead? What age were they? That type of thing. It's so different. So my situation, my family situation is going to be totally different than everybody else. So no one should feel like they should match my situation,
It never pays to compare losses, because everyone's is different and everyone's going to experience it differently, and everyone's going to need different things to help themselves give their grief a voice, as I say. And I think it's Thanksgiving coming up tomorrow. It's Thanksgiving. Because it's Thanksgiving, there's a lot of expectations to be grateful for things and have gratitude and express gratitude and show gratitude to and for others. And that can be really hard to do in this time of grief, depending on where you're at. And there's a lot of collective grief happening in the world right now as well. Thinking about gratitude, I always tell my clients, it's okay to be grateful for the fact you got out of bed. That's a good place to start. And if you can find more things to be grateful for than that, great. But if that's all you got, that's still one thing.
Yes. Beth and Jeff, I was nodding my head and I really wanted to clap at what you both were saying, right? Comparison. Really don't compare your grief to other people. Your journey is your journey, and that can cause you to go down a rabbit hole. And so, like Beth mentioned, when finding gratitude, start small. You got out of bed, you took a shower, you washed your hair, whatever it may be. Those are all good things to be grateful for. And as you start to get further along in your grief journey, then you can start to expand that horizon. Okay, I'm grateful that I made it an hour without crying. I'm grateful that I made it a day without crying. It really involves being gentle with yourself. Like Beth mentioned, we've all gone through collective grief. A lot of us have gone through individual grief with different losses. And so we know how painful it may be. And so while you're being gentle with yourself, be gentle with other people who are going through that path too, because you know how hard it is.
And one other thing I'd like to bring forward, as you move down your grief path and on this journey forward, you will get to a point where you might decide to volunteer for an organization or something along those lines and give back and give gratitude towards others. Doing those acts of kindness. I bring that up because the 13th of November was World Kindness Day. And I think that's fitting, just given that if we do acts of kindness for others or we receive acts of kindness or gratitude from others, we feel better. And so eventually we get to this place in our grief where we'll still have our good days and our bad days, but we're able to sort of acknowledge, if you will, the ways in which grief has changed us and the ways in which grief has given us the ability to give back in a way, or pay it forward in a way.
As you were talking, one quote that popped into my mind that my deceased loved one said to me is that it's better to have loved and lost than not loved at all. Grief comes with loving somebody. And when you can get to the point where you can be grateful for certain moments that you have with that particular loved one, and it can bring you joy and comfort. I know that now, along with my grief journey in different areas, is that, I start to smile, during holidays when I think about what a certain loved one did during those particular times. And so it does get easier along the way, and you can be grateful for those moments that you did have with that particular person.
It does.
To me, that's huge, because to think that we can be happy without my mom being there for Thanksgiving, when she always did the big spreads and all this fancy schmancy stuff and all that. It was her way of doing it, And now we're all happy. She's with us. She's still with us in a sense but it takes a little bit. And I think the core of us, because it was, as you said, Beth, an expected thing coming on, that I guess it seems like it was an automatic feeling for me. I don't want to use the word easier, but it was part of the journey, that the grieving was lived while she was ill, and it switched over. I think all of us were in the same place. So I think that's really good that you can smile, Robin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious if you're going to carry on a tradition that she started, or are you going to start something new? Because a lot of people choose to do either one of those things. Sometimes it's really painful to carry on something you've always done and easier to begin something new. And sometimes we want to carry on those traditions because it keeps them with us.
Well, with my stepdad, I've known him since I was 7 years old, still around. So it's still kind of, I think at some point, new traditions will have to be started. But for now, we're just continuing on.
There's a place for both.
Yeah. Yep. There is a place for both. One personal story that popped into my mind is my maternal grandmother passed away in 2010. I mean, she was a great cook. She's known for her cooking. Thanksgivings were always at her house. And my sister tries to carry on her recipe cooking tradition, especially with the baked goods. And my sister also too has a habit of walking away when she puts stuff in the oven. So it kind of turns out a little not the same as my grandmother's. That's a way of, like was mentioned, right? The carrying on my grandmother's spirit, right? What she did through her recipes. And so it creates a sense of laughter, because my sister's like, yeah, no, it doesn't taste like Mama Jules. It doesn't taste the same. But I do like the idea of carrying, making your own tradition and also to carrying in remembrance of a person who passed away.
This time of year for me, if my grandma was alive, we always would get together and bake. Just the whole family would get together and bake. And seriously, we'd make like 25 or 30 different recipes and give away, goodie plates of cookies and fudge and candy and all this kind of stuff we'd make. And we still bake every year. It's a lot less than it used to be, but we always have to kind of carry on with one family recipe, whether we add new ones or not. There's like one that we always carry forward. We pick, from the favorites and keep making it every year, even though grandma's been gone for 33 years now. But, it's a way to honor her and keep that tradition alive.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, whatever way you choose to show gratitude during your grief process, just know that it's okay. That whatever you choose to do for you to help you cope, it's your own journey. Nobody else's journey but yours.
There's no wrong way to grieve. And Jeff, I want to thank you for coming out from behind the editor's booth and being on the podcast. It was really great to have you here with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
It was great. Usually I'm just listening. I feel like I'm having a session each time I record these with you, and this time to participate, it just goes a little deeper. So thank you. Thank you both.
Yeah. And as always, if you have anything that you would like us to talk about, any questions you'd like us to answer, anything at all, you can give us a call, you can send an email. We do get those and we do respond.
Yes, and we really want to hear from you. So let us know what you're thinking.
And as always, please take care and stay grounded. And we look forward to being back with you in December.
Yeah, take care until next time.
You can send Beth and Robin a message at 612-367-6093 or by email at info@blindabilities.com. They'd love to hear from you.
When we share
what we see through
each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the reality of blind abilities.
And the realities of blind abilities.